to people to let them know, to remind them to be here. So hopefully you're at home and have decided to just catch up to us anyways. And if not, if you're not here right now and you're at home later, thanks for tuning in later. We thank the church and the organization here that provides us a space to meet with. We call it our club. And we have good times here and talk about a lot of interesting stuff. We do have some talk from the Green Sanctuary will be coming up. People from the Green Sanctuary that's a part of this church will be talking about climate change and some other topics that they've reserved some time for. So I have some interesting things coming up. And this, I've been looking forward to hearing about Scott's visit to Dayton, Tennessee, and what's going on there and what they've learned in 100 years. So it is not that I see. So I thought that in a couple weeks I would talk about some of the ideas based on talks by Jerry Coyne, books by Jerry Coyne, a evolutionary biologist at University of Chicago, and Dawkins and other people that talk about why evolution is true. Sometimes we hear this and we're always fighting these issues about I choose not to believe this and so on, but it's not a theory. You know, what is a theory? A theory is just random ideas. But actually why evolution is true, why it's a fact, why there's facts about it. So some of the basic data that really supports that. So I thought that might be a good add-on to Scott's talk. So it's nice to be in a group and in a community here of people who enjoy hearing about this stuff, and we're supported, and we support the church that provides us a space. So other than that, you're about ready to go, it looks like. So we'll turn it over to Scott. Karsten had something he wanted to show you.
Karsten, did you have something you wanted to maybe afterwards? Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. First, science lovers to a person, I bet. We're happy to be here. What is this, Mike? 13 years? Yeah, 13 years for Mike, 12 years for me. And you know, you never run out of things to talk about when you're talking about science. There's always something new coming up, some new discovery. One of my favorites is that junk DNA isn't so much junk anymore, and there's all kinds of fascinating discoveries that should not be, however, misinterpreted as, well, you know, scientists are always changing their mind. Who knows? Maybe tomorrow things will fall up, right? So there are some things that remain verifiable and accurate as descriptions of reality that we have derived from science. And I'll talk about that towards the end of the talk. I want to split today's discussion into 3 parts. The first part is you get to look at my slides for my summer vacation. I know, exciting, isn't it? How long has it been since you've been able to do that, right? The second part is, why did we go to Dayton, Tennessee? What is the Scopes trial? What was it? How did it proceed? And what was the outcome? So that's the second part. And then the third part, I will warn you in advance, has to do with my disposition regarding the importance of science versus mythology or magic as explanations for the world. Some people may weigh things a little differently than I weigh them. And, you know, we're welcome to talk about that, discuss that, to have our own journeys of discovery. But one of the tenets of Unitarian Universalism is the free and responsible search for truth and meaning. And I assert that a responsible search for truth necessarily entails science. And that's one of the reasons that we're here. That's one of the reasons that we are encouraged to meet here at a Unitarian Universalist organization. And I'm really glad that we are welcomed here. All right, our summer vacation. So my husband Dave, who's running the AV in the back, he and I went down to Tennessee. One of our dear friends and his family moved down there a couple years ago, so we went to visit them and then took advantage of that visit to go to eastern Tennessee, to Dayton, Tennessee, which is right on the border in southeastern Tennessee. A small little town, was founded as a mining town. The mine ran out. They were looking for some other reason to gain some notoriety, and they found it in 1925. But along the way on our trip, we went to Chattanooga, where there was a famous Civil War battle, and there's this really prominent overlook there featured on this title slide. So we had a lot of fun in Chattanooga as well. And there's my friend, our friend Joe, and my husband Dave playing a very intense game of checkers. That was part of our assigned activities, I think. Here's more about that Chattanooga and Dayton area. There's this wonderful, like hand-sized moth that we saw down there, this green moth. It was beautiful. We also saw a similarly sized golden moth. We went up to the battlefield area on top of the mountain there, and we saw a monument to the Illinois regiment that participated in the battle. And there's the cable car that goes up the mountain. And so I really recommend it. It's a beautiful part of the country. It's accessible from Chicago, maybe a day's drive, and just really spectacular. And then on we went to Dayton, Tennessee, which has the distinction of being the capital of Ray County, Tennessee. And there we are pulling up in front of his courthouse, which you can't see in this picture, but there's a sign there commemorating the Scopes trial from 1925 that occurred in July of 1925. So we were there largely to participate in the centennial celebrations of the Scopes trial. In 1925, they had banners strung across the street. They had a storefront with a dancing monkey. They had all kinds of monkey-related ideas and memorabilia, including, of course, sock monkeys, which I have procured one for your pleasure here. So a nice example of a sock monkey. You know, the misnomer that was promulgated by William Jennings Bryan and others that man descended from apes, right? That's never been something asserted by the theory of evolution or by Darwin or by evolutionary biologists, but it is often misconstrued as a statement consonant with the theory of evolution. It is, in fact, antithetical to the theory of evolution. Simians are a whole branch on the tree of life, and great apes and chimpanzees and bonobos and old world monkeys and new world monkeys and humans are all on that branch. And at some point, way back in time, 10 million years ago or so, we had a common ancestor. We had a common ancestor with chimpanzees about 5 million years ago. And we did not evolve from monkeys. So, common misnomer that was promulgated during the trial. Here's an image of the actual courthouse. They restored it, I believe, in the 1970s. It's a beautiful old building, and it was lined with placards that helped you get into the spirit of the thing for the, they have a reenactment play that they did there that I'll talk about here in a minute. And then one of the things they did a couple days before the reenactment play is that they had guest lecturers who spoke about different perspectives on the trial and the issues entailed in the trial. I will tell you that they had vendors and booksellers and whatnot available there, presenting their wares. And all of the booksellers were selling creationist-centric kinds of information and T-shirts and whatnot. There was not a evolutionary advocacy representation at the vendor tables that I could discern. Most of the talks that were given were from a conciliatory or purely creationist point of view, because this event was largely sponsored by the William Jennings Bryan College, which was founded shortly after his death, and to continue his messaging. So, however, that being said, everybody we met was exceptionally kind and polite and well-spoken and thoughtful and good people. So we had a nice time there. I tried to get into a tussle with a couple of people. You know, people would say, hey, where are you from? Oh, we're from Chicago. Oh, what brings you down here? Oh, several atheist publications that I have seen. And Richard Dawkins was talking about this. He's going to be in the area. Nobody picked a fight, so nobody took the bait, so, unfortunately. I was prepared. All right, so there's a genuine sock monkey from the era that they were selling at the time. This is in the basement of the Rea County Courthouse, where they have a museum, and I recommend that if you deign to go there at some point. And then here's the actual courtroom. They have gussied it up quite a bit. For a while it was falling into disrepair, but over the years they've really put a polish on it, and it was a really nice place to be. And here's two different pictures of that courthouse, one from 1925 and one from 2025. And as you can see, it's essentially the same. In the 1925 version, if you look closely, you'll see that the windows are open. That was before they really had any air conditioning. And this summer, the windows were closed, and it was air conditioned, and it was quite a nice space. And then they put on their own play that they've created called Destiny in Dayton. And here's a snapshot I took during the play. And they had, the way they did this play, it's not the famous play you may be familiar with called Inherit the Wind. This was called Destiny in Dayton. And the differentiator is that the Destiny in Dayton performance drew exclusively from transcripts of the trial. So the trial was famous for many reasons. One of the reasons was it was the first trial that was broadcast by WGN in Chicago. The recordings have been lost since then, so that broadcast is no longer extant. But at the time, it was broadcast and available to people all over the country, and had quite an influx of tourists and whatnot into Dayton, which at the time I think had a population of about 1,800, so a really small town. So why Dayton? What happened in Dayton? So the Tennessee legislature passed in 1925 something called the Butler Act, which forbade the teaching of evolution, to put it succinctly. You're welcome to read that if you want. So the newly formed American Civil Liberties Union, which was based out of New York, was looking for a fight. And they wanted an opportunity to contest some of these laws. There were other states that were working towards similar laws, enshrining the teaching of creationism or outlawing the teaching of evolution. But this is the one that the ACLU decided to get involved in. And as you may know, there were a couple of famous litigators who became involved, one for the defense and one for the prosecution. And I'll talk about some of those folks. So when the trial was conceived, it was essentially a gentleman's agreement that occurred in a pharmacy at the soda counter. They're like, you know what? We could use some notoriety in our town. Our local iron and coal mine has gone out of business, and we need some other claim to fame. And there's this new Tennessee law that was passed, and so they wrangled up a substitute teacher from the local high school. And there's some conflicting reports I've read in different books and articles about whether he actually taught the theory of evolution. He certainly was a substitute biology teacher. The actual biology teacher was ill, and so he substituted for a while. John Scopes did. And they had children that testified that they had been taught the theory of evolution in high school, but those children were coached about what to say before they got onto the stand. So there's a little bit of controversy to this day about whether or not within the classroom John T. Scopes actually taught the theory of evolution. It was, however, certainly referred to as a scientific theory in the biology textbook that the Texas, I don't know if it was school board or legislature, but the Tennessee had approved. So Tennessee had approved this biology textbook that included information about the theory of evolution, and John T. Scopes allegedly taught from that textbook, including information, and that violated the Butler Act. And so they asked John if he'd be willing to go on trial for doing this. He said, well, heck, I guess. I mean, I'm not doing anything else this summer. And so they called over in the drugstore. They called over a justice of the peace who said, "Would you please, arrest him?" And so they technically arrested him, and but he finished his soda or whatever, and he never spent a day in jail. Right? It was all very amicable, and. But largely it was conceived as a way to get Dayton on the map. And boy, howdy, it worked. It was probably the most famous court case in the United States up until arguably the O.J. Simpson trial. All right, some of the other players. William Jennings Bryan had run for president 2 or 3 times before. And he was a champion of the idea of majoritarianism. So if you're in a room of 100 people and 51 people vote that all redheads should be summarily executed, I'm sorry, Joanne. Right? That's majoritarianism. Whatever the majority rules, that's it. That the voices have spoken. This is the way it's going to be. And this was a political philosophy that William Jennings Bryan was in favor of. However, he was also in favor of women's rights and many other progressive causes. He actually ran as a Democrat in that era. He served as on the cabinet for Woodrow Wilson, until America joined World War I, and then he resigned in protest. So he was a pacifist as well. He was known as the commoner, by the way. William Jennings Bryan was the commoner. He often supported the common man and the underdog. Clarence Darrow was also a big supporter of the underdog. He defended some notorious criminals in high-profile court cases, and he was known for being an agnostic and a skeptic and a humanist, which is what I am. I'm also a skeptic and a humanist, a scientific skeptic. I'm not just skeptical of everything. Dinner's ready? I'm not sure I believe that. Right? So I'm a scientific skeptic, and that's a point of view that I hope becomes more popular as the ages roll on. And then he also championed individual rights, so in opposition to this idea of majoritarianism, right? In our country, we have a lot of our government set up on a majoritarian sort of philosophy, but we also have a Bill of Rights that protects ostensibly the rights of minorities and the rights of free expression if you're a dissenter. So there's that conflict that happens in political philosophy, and it comes up time and time again. And it was an element of the philosophical contention between Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan. It was billed as the trial of the century, and it very nearly succeeded, again, perhaps with the exception of the O.J. trial for the next 100 years. The prosecution was headed by some local lawyers, and one of whom was roundly applauded by both sides of the issue as being highly professional and competent as a lawyer. But of course, the person who got the spotlight was William Jennings Bryan, pictured there, sort of in the middle in the white shirt with the significantly receding hairline. And the initial defense strategy was to assert that evolution and creation were not antithetical. And this is a common viewpoint today by people who maintain some fairly liberal take on some claims from traditional religion like Christianity or Islam that talk about special creation of the earth and special creation of humans. You know, a lot of people to this day still look for ways to reconcile the two ideologies of special creation and gradual evolution. And that's kind of what the defense strategy was intended to be from the outset, was these two views are not antithetical. You can be a great Christian, upstanding in your moral outlook, and still lend credence to the theory of evolution. The ACLU wanted to argue for academic freedom as well, and freedom of expression. So there were several different sort of streams flowing into this argument that they were going to present. But Clarence Darrow, for the defense, didn't really follow that strategy. He mostly wanted to make it, or behaved in a way consistent with making it a show trial about religion versus modernism. And so, in a sense, religion itself, Christian, conservative, fundamentalist religion, was put on trial. Lots of expert witnesses were called, biologists, liberal theologians, Unitarian ministers, and they were put up in the town of Dayton, many of them at a single mansion. And the judge, however, ended up not allowing expert testimony to be made to the jury. He would allow it to be submitted in written form occasionally and then put into the record for the trial, but he would not allow expert testimony to happen in front of the jury. And the judge, prior to the convening of the trial, made a statement that he, the judge, believed that Scopes had definitely violated the law, and that the jury's job was to hear the evidence and determine whether John T. Scopes had violated the Tennessee law as written. Well, it's hard to argue with that. The law said, "You shall not teach evolution." And allegedly, he did, according to the testimony of the students. And John Scopes did not deny having taught evolution. He knew what the game was. And so the trial was about whether or not John T. Scopes violated that Tennessee statute. And of course he did, right? To casual inspection, it's obvious that if, in fact, he mentioned anything about evolution, which, again, allegedly he did, then that is a violation of the Tennessee statute. So pretty cut and dry. But it wasn't cut and dry in the national opinion because, as I intimated earlier, it was a referendum about religion versus modernism or science. And one of the most famous things that happened during the trial was they had so many spectators in that large courtroom that they moved it outdoors. It was also hot and stuffy in there. So they moved the proceedings outdoors. And on the last day of the proceedings, if you look carefully at this photograph, that's William Jennings Bryan sitting there in a chair to give testimony, and he is being questioned by Clarence Darrow. And William Jennings Bryan positioned himself as an expert on biblical truth. And so Clarence Darrow asked him about certain fairly difficult to manage biblical truths, difficult to manage in an era that was 2,000 years or so more advanced than the time of the biblical authors, when allegory and metaphor were viewed as a plausible couching of some of the biblical explanations. But William Jennings Bryan said every word is true, every word is gospel, every word came straight from the mouth of the Lord, so every word has to be defended. And so Clarence Darrow asked him point blank, do you believe the earth was made in 6 days? And interestingly, William Jennings Bryan hemmed and hawed. Because he wasn't ignorant of science, he wasn't ignorant of modernism, and he essentially, he wasn't the one who invented it, but he made an answer that was essentially, well, God's days, our days, a millennium here, a millennium there. I don't really know. God works in mysterious ways, right? I'm paraphrasing. That's not the exact quote. But that was the gist of it. Let's see. How old do you think the earth is? And, what was it? Bishop Usher had said that it was on an October. Wasn't it an October day? And sometime 6,000 years ago. And so I don't recall whether or not Bryan referenced that specific day, but he was a proponent of what we would today call young earth creationism. And one that really stumped him was, where did Cain get his wife? The Bible doesn't talk about it. Cain and Abel. I mean, Adam and Eve, but apparently all the other females just, magic. Not that the first wasn't magic, but apparently, thank you, not important enough to be explicitly referred to in the Bible. So, and there were several other questions like this that really put William Jennings Bryan in the spotlight, and Christian fundamentalism and its explanation for a magical creation of the earth and the universe, and especially humans, really put them in a spotlight and broadcast that across America. And he hemmed and hawed and fumbled and couldn't give a cogent answer that supported his going-in perspective that the Word of God was infallible and accurate. So that caused a lot of problems. So one of the things that happened after this was William Jennings Bryan penned a response. So I was so flustered. Let me write what I really want to say. And so he wrote this long thing, and then he died. Like just a week or so after the trial, he died. So he never got a chance to, in person, give a good refutation or rehabilitation to his performance on the witness stand. All right, here's a picture of Judge John Ralston. Ralston was very much on board with the idea of this being a highly publicized event that would be good for the reputations of many people involved, including himself. And this is an image of Ralston, who did a little bit of grandstanding during the trial, and then there's the jury handing down a verdict. And interestingly enough, the foreman from the jury, I believe, was later interviewed and said that he found a lot of value in the notion of the theory of evolution personally, but that they were instructed to decide whether or not John Scopes had violated the Tennessee law, and of course he did. Okay? The verdict was essentially a foregone conclusion before the trial. But what they knew was that there would be appeals. And interestingly enough, this verdict of guilty for John Scopes was indeed overruled. Was it overruled because of the separation of church and state and forcing public schools to teach religious curriculum? No. Was it overruled because of individual freedom of teachers to teach the science that they believed to be most appropriate for young minds? No. Was it overturned on the guarantee of the Constitution of any other rights that we have? No. It was overturned because the $100 fine levied against John T. Scopes was decided unilaterally by the judge, whereas Tennessee law said that in such cases the jury had to decide the fine. So this law stayed on the books until, I'll get to that in a minute. I'll surprise you with it. Hold your breath. Don't pass out. Okay, so the fight continues to this day. And here's a couple of statues that are out in front of the courthouse. There's a William Jennings Bryan statue that was funded by the Bryan College that was erected, I think, sometime in the 70s. I don't remember exactly. And then there's a statue of Clarence Darrow that is also there, that was put there in 2017. And it was funded by the Freedom from Religion Foundation and largely paid for by John DeLance, Q from Star Trek. Interesting factoid. All right, so there they are in front of the courthouse, forevermore facing off, or facing to the side of each other. All right. In 1963, there was a teacher who was fired from the Tennessee schools in accord with that old law. In 1963. He won on appeal, and the law was overturned in 1963. So that law, the Butler Act, was on the books in Tennessee for a very long time, nearly 50 years. The Scopes trial was not sufficient to convince the Tennessee legislature that maybe that was not a wise law. Here's a list of some others. I'm sorry, it was 1967. In 1963, the Supreme Court decided that mandatory Bible readings in public schools were unconstitutional. And here's some other examples of when essentially this issue has come up again and again in the United States legal system. I'm not going to read all of them to you. I'll leave this up here for a second for you to read. If you can't read them from where you are, you're welcome to come up and look at it. Yes, there was a question, was William Jennings Bryan both a prosecutor and a witness? Yes. He was called as an expert witness on the fundamental truths in the Bible. The rest of the prosecution advised him against it. But having run for president, you may presume correctly that he had a fairly large ego and felt quite confident about taking the stand and attesting to the infallible Word of God. Okay, another question. Could you please wait for the microphone because we're on YouTube. We need people to hear you.
Do you happen to know, are there any cases going to the current new Supreme Court regarding this?
Yes, and I'm going to get to that. Good question. All right. So this is some of the subsequent courses. I love this statement, inherit more wind. I stole this from the cover of an issue of the magazine Free Inquiry from 2003. I believe Tom Flynn wrote an article. Inherit more, I love that, inherit more wind. Okay. And then left off of that list I just showed you was Kitzmiller versus Dover School District in 2005. Some of you may be familiar with that. That's where they had a biology textbook called of pandas and thumbs and pandas.
Of pandas and people.
What was it?
Of pandas and people.
Of pandas and people, okay. And upon close examination of that text, they found the following. In one draft, the editing job was so sloppy that the words got mangled into the now infamous C design proponenticists. It was literally the word creationists overwritten with design proponents, leaving the hybrid typo. So what they had done is that they had taken a textbook written to proselytize the divine creation point of view and they did a search and replace for creationists and replaced it with intelligent design. And to this day, intelligent design is still advocated in front of the courts as being an alternative way of capturing natural science, of explaining the history of the world and creatures and humanity. Here's some of the recent cases before the courts. I will give you time to read those as well. I'm not going to dictate them to you. So as you can see with the bottom one there, various new creationist bills and resolutions and court cases are at the state level, sometimes at the national level. This particular Supreme Court seems to have a affinity for recognizing the prominence of states' rights in areas where the federal government has a clear sanction against something. So there's a kind of ascendancy of states' independence in terms of being able to specify some of their own policies for health care and insurance and abortion rights and other things that we thought were settled on a national level previously. And so some of these court cases that are pending now are deliberately trying to take advantage of the disposition of this current Supreme Court to have some retrials, if you will, of some of these issues about the separation of church and state, and especially creationism. By the way, this list was compiled with the help of ChatGPT, referencing our prior thing, but I did look them up. I did, yeah, okay. Why does it matter? I think this is the million-dollar quote. I will read it to you. William Jennings Bryan, in one of his speeches, said, "I object to the Darwinian theory because I fear we shall lose the consciousness of God's presence in our daily life. If we must accept the theory that through all the ages no spiritual force has touched the life of man and shaped the destiny of nations, this is why it was perceived as a threat." He wrote this and gave this in speeches in 1904. Here we are 100 years later, and this is still being argued. What happens if God didn't make humans? Well, then maybe there's no reason to have God in our foreign policy, or God in our monetary policy, or God's rules specifying what women's rights should be, or LGBTQ rights, etc. So if you combine religion and policy and look beyond the simplistic, well, maybe not simplistic, one of the essential issues of evolution versus creation, we start seeing a whole panoply of human rights and scientific issues that are under threat. This is why it's important 100 years later. All right, this is an illustration from my book. It's one of the ways I like to describe science. I use $10 words because I have them. One of these $10 words that I use is in the explanation of this chart. Science is an asymptotic approach to a perfect description of reality. What is an asymptotic approach? It's the red line. If you go back 6,000 years or so, this red line is very far from an accurate description of reality. In fact, The difference between our best explanation of why the winds blow and why the sun seems to rise in the east and why people live and die and what relationship we have to all the other beings and organisms on earth. Many, many years ago, the separation between what we knew best and what our myth informed us about was very small. The best we could do was to make up myths and stories. As time has gone on, as we have gotten closer to the modern era, this curve bends towards a more perfect description of reality. Occasionally, there are little jiggles in that curve. Butter versus margarine, right? Something causes cancer, something's good for you. Especially when dealing with incredibly complex systems like the human biology or any kind of biology. The most complex thing in the known universe sits between your ears. So whenever some scientists make assertions about the way biology works, or the way your brain works, or the way consciousness or psychology works, they may be onto something. But you can reasonably expect some tweaking as we go forward because we don't have a nearly perfect explanation for some of the complexities of the universe. We're doing our best. Okay? So, in this estimation, the Scopes trial happened somewhere around here. Somewhere, maybe that's 1925. There was a lot of accumulated knowledge. Einstein had shown the existence of molecules with the description of why Brownian motion happens, the random wiggling of tiny things suspended in fluid, was the first definitive proof of the existence of molecules. He should have won a Nobel Prize for it, but he didn't. And then he also recognized that light could instigate electrical signals, which is why the phones that you have in your pocket can take pictures, and why the solar panels on some of your roofs can generate electricity. That was also Einstein, 1905, 20 years before the Scopes trial. Charles Darwin, his seminal work was, 1875?
1859, he published
1859.
Origin of Species.
Thank you, 1859. So there'd been a lot of scientific progress, including the special and general theory of relativity, which don't have to do with evolution. But there'd been a lot of scientific progress by 1925. There was a lot of information available to people about how the world really worked. These people weren't ignorant unless they were willfully ignorant, just like today. So one of the things that I've been told a couple times about Science Sunday is that if you want good science education, there are a number of places you can go to get that. There are books, there are countless YouTube videos, there's open courseware from MIT. Some of the best scientists and science educators in the world are available from your living room. So why should we stand here in a pulpit on a Sunday morning talking about science? Well, I took some of those statements to heart. And I think one of the things that we can differentiate here is to draw lessons from science about useful ways to approach the world and the facts within it. So these are things that I wrote because I can also be a bit wordy. Myths are captivating and often elevate human beings to the starring role. Science humbles us, certainly, but it also empowers us to thrive and act wisely in a complex, changing, and ever more wondrous world. All right? just to name a few. So we've got 15 minutes left for discussion, and I wanted to leave time for that because I'm sure many of you have opinions about these topics. And that concludes my science presentation for today.
Hello, and thank you for your talk. This subject really does hit really hard with me and everything that is going on right now in politics because, as I've found out, Michigan has passed a law called HB 4938 that equates trans people to pornography, and now they're going to start targeting these people for all of that. I've been on the front lines, and I have fought against this science denial for all my life. This narrative of defining what is a woman for people who use chromosomes without actually going into looking how that changes, what's actually going on in the biology. This narrative is an echo chamber now that's taking on its own new life, and it's a fire that's feeding itself. And I want to know if there's like an actual strategy we can do to come in and actually get the science into these populations that are repeating these echo chambers that's affecting people's lives. This hits so hard as to what's happening right now in America.
Yeah.
I really want to know if there's a strategy that's different than what I'm talking about.
So I'm not plugged in to the political zeitgeist and activist community, unfortunately. I think there's a role for that, and I suspect people here at this church, there are people here at this church that are more plugged into that than I am. That being said, I tend to be more of a reader and a thinker and a communicator than a marcher. It's just who I am. But I've read some books, and during our humanist meetings, so I also have the privilege of being the president of our local humanist chapter, which meets here at the church. And during some of our meetings last year, I used as source material for the theme of our meetings several books I've read about how to have an effective argument, how to convince people, and I can recommend to you some of those books. One of the lessons that's really, really hard to take away from that kind of research about how to argue with people effectively is to not say you're a stupid idiot.
I have watched a psychologist online start something called the Enemies Project, where he has a actual strategy where he gets people like in a marriage counseling session where he not only has the opposite person speak the views of the person,
Yeah.
but he has them sit with them in the head and see if you can argue from the other person's perspective.
Right.
I think that is one of the most psychologically effective ways to argue this, but the problem is there is I got to be careful because this is on YouTube. There's a force in our politics and everything that is strictly out to shut down those conversations. And I think that scares me more than anything about the political situation we're in right now.
I would caution you that when the liberal branch represented in our government is in power, they have also had a tendency to try and shut down some arguments. So discourse is a good thing. A better argument should win the day, but a silenced argument is likely to win the day, right?
Well, I was interested, I so happen to have a copy scanned to you. I guess this is the Dayton Herald from that day.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
So that was very cool. It's kind of hard to read from.
Yeah.
Another thing is, if anyone is interested in reading it, there's a really good book that was God, Democracy, and the Trial of the Century, which covered the trial.
I've read two books about it. One is Summer for the Gods, which won the Pulitzer Prize. It is my favorite of the two books I've read. And then there's a recent book by Brenda Wineapple, and I'm drawing a blank on his name, which is unforgivable. I'm sorry. But there's a recent book about the trial. And in my opinion, Brenda's book goes very deeply into the backstory of some of the participants, whereas this one doesn't do as much of that and talks more about some of the political and philosophical issues, which resonates with me personally. All right, other questions and comments?
I wanted to say one thing. There's a group, I don't know if this is,
Dave, is that microphone registering?
There's a group called the National Center for Science Education, which you referenced in some of your talk. We've had her name escapes me right now. but
Eugenie Scott.
Eugenie Scott, she's come actually to this church and talked
She was
to us.
there. I met her again, and
Did you?
Yeah, she was there at the event.
And she's a scientist who's actually given up a lot of her work, her actual science work, the thing that maybe drove her to become a scientist and wanted to do these things, to basically act as a doorstop or a stopping point for so much of what she sees as illegitimate or wrong-headed attempts to silence science people. You know, and Dawkins talks about that as
Yeah.
well, too, that you think about a world in which people that are scientists that are really have a drive and a desire and have spent their life trying to develop and
To move
study
that curve.
important aspects
Yeah.
of life have to put that on the side and fight the fact that there's people that just say, you know, la, 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 I don't hear you, or whatever. Dawkins does a pretty good thing about, imagine somebody that studied and loves to study and knows everything about and wants to spread this knowledge about the Roman Empire. So he talks about, you know, he wants to do this with his students, tell them about the ways that they built roads and the ways that they organized their politics and the ways that they did all these different things. And people say, no, never happened. That wasn't there. You know, I don't think that ever happened. And so there's scientists that have had to give up their whole career, and what a frustrating thing that is, to sit there and, you know, fight this fight against people that just don't want to listen to certain aspects of things.
Yeah, you brought up the notion of trans rights and LGBTQ rights are a big part of the current conversation. I'm considering doing a Science Sunday about the complexity of human sexuality. I am not an expert in it, and it's a very complicated subject, and I'm concerned that I might say something incorrect. I'm not so concerned that I might offend somebody, because I will say, to the best of my knowledge, what is correct. But I will say that Richard Dawkins has gotten into a bit of hot water for making what many of us consider to be incorrect assertions about human sexual and gender identity. So just because you're an expert, just because you're an expert in biology, just because you're an eloquent and highly regarded science communicator, doesn't mean that you can't make mistakes. And it goes for me and Mike and all of you as well. I think Dawkins made a mistake, and I think it's regrettable that he hasn't owned up to that mistake. There may be other reasons for that that I'm not aware of. I don't know the man personally. So anyway, this issue of trans rights, I think it's a gateway. It's a gateway to talking about gay rights. It's a gateway to relitigating the idea of Ogerbefell, the gay marriage ruling. You know, the fact that the Supreme Court has recently allowed racial profiling to occur is just infuriating and heartbreaking. So we are a democracy. Our vote counts, our voices count, and I encourage all of us to speak up for what's true and real. All right. Oh, another question or comment?
So just a comment with regard to the trans rights things. I remember seeing that there's an upcoming adult education series at this church on some Wednesday evenings in October
Okay.
that is, I believe, a bit more about making one's congregation into a welcoming congregation. But as I recall, the first couple of sessions also have quite a bit about the science and some of the, like, what's actually true
Okay.
about trans folks. And there might also be some resources, you were saying, like, how do you, plugging into the justice aspect of it. So that might be something to look into and see if it's a fit for what you're talking about. I'm not sure that it is. I just remember hearing about it.
Thank you for reminding us about that. All right. Any other questions or comments? Yep.
Here we go.
Yeah, I think there are several organizations we talked about. The American Civil Liberties Union, you already mentioned, is out front. The Freedom from Religion Foundation, you mentioned there, is another biggie. Americans United for Separation of Church and State is another biggie.
The American Humanist Association?
American Humanists, there are a number of organizations that are available. You can join them, you can get their information online. They're the ones that go to the Supreme Court and actually win.
Yeah.
Democracy Docket is another one that is broadly picked up on some of those issues, Mark Elias in particular. So there are a number of organizations out there that are fighting a good fight, and I'm sure they'd appreciate any support that we could give them.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, thank you all for coming. And Mike, you'll be here in a couple weeks. Dave and I are going to be down in Tennessee again, but I hope you have an excellent turnout. And thank you all for coming. Thank you for all of you for caring about science.